In all countries, Jews are in the minority. They have no nation of their own. They have no flag. The World Almanac states that there are only 15 million Jews in all the world, and only 4 million resident in North America. Certainly they are in the minority, but a closely woven minority in their racial tendencies, a powerful minority in their influence, a minority endowed with an aggressiveness and initiative, which, despite all obstacles, has carried their sons to the pinnacle of success in journalism, in radio, in finance, in all the sciences and arts. Thus, with these facilities at their disposal, no story of persecution was ever told one half so well, one half so thoroughly, as the story of this $400 million reprisal which culminated a series of persecutions. Perhaps, may I resubmit, this is attributable to the fact that Jews, through their native ability, have risen to such high places in radio and in press and in finance. Perhaps this persecution is only the coincidental last straw which has broken the back of this generation's patience. Whatever be the reason of this unparalleled publicity, we are all thankful to God that it has happened, for it gives both Jew and Gentile, Christian and non-Christian, an opportunity to write a new precedent, to establish a new tradition, a precedent and tradition by which we will all unite.
On November 20th, 1938, millions of Americans tuned into that radio broadcast to hear Father Charles Coughlin blame Kristallnacht, also known as the Night of Broken Glass, on the German Jews who had been targeted by Hitler's regime and his racist followers in a night of terror, which saw nearly 100 Jews killed and thousands of businesses, homes, and synagogues vandalized and torched. Prior to Kristallnacht, Hitler had targeted German Jews with repressive policies, humiliation, and exploitation, but hadn't yet taken open, physically violent action against them. Most historians now point to the Night of Broken Glass as a turning point. Shortly afterward, 30,000 Jewish men were sent to concentration camps, and while murder had previously been used as an intimidation tactic, Hitler realized that it could be carried out on an industrial scale, which would culminate in what we now call the Holocaust. Back in America, Father Charles Coughlin argued that the Jews deserved what happened to them on the Night of Broken Glass. He opined that the Jews controlled world politics, as well as the banking system, were uniquely responsible for communism, were atheistic, and had killed more than 20 million Christians and stolen billions of dollars of their property. Kristallnacht, he argued, was nothing more than, quote, the coincidental last straw which had broken the back of this generation's patience, end quote. Coughlin was one of the most popular and influential people in 1930s America, and is often credited with being the founder of hate radio. Before Alex Jones, Rush Limbaugh, and Pat Robertson, there was Father Charles Coughlin. At the height of his popularity, nearly a third of the country tuned into his radio broadcasts, and they listened while he supported fascist dictators, excused genocide, and spread the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that Jews were plotting to take over the world. Fascists, their sympathizers, and the useful idiots that helped spread their message of hate have always understood the power of propaganda. They used it to their advantage in the 1930s, and they continue to manipulate and radicalize people today.
I believe in nonviolence. I think that we should react and we should work and organize as white people. But I just want an equanimity here. I want some fairness involved here. And if they're going to treat me this way, they should treat the communists the same way. If they don't, well, that's fine. But I do believe in freedom of speech, and I'm afraid this is giving Britain a bad image in some parts of the world because they're suppressing an idea. If you take a look at our country, the country that I come from, of course my national origin is here, but the country I come from, you'll see that there's tremendous violence. The children are afraid to walk into their classrooms. You can't walk on many American streets. And this is the widespread violence that will come to Britain if indeed the non-whites continue to come in this unending stream.
This left-wing, right-wing stuff is completely irrelevant. These are stooges of the oligarchs. Every single homosexual is a proxy warrior, at least a potential proxy warrior for the oligarchs. It's oligarchs and homosexuals. That's warfare in our age. It has nothing to do with left and right. The thing that blew up Turning Point in the United States was the fact that Charlie Kirk brought a black homosexual onto the stage with him and announced to everyone that to be on board, to call yourself a conservative, you have to accept homosexuality. And suddenly everybody's saying, well, who said that? That he blew it up himself. It happened like that, spontaneously. That's what's going on. The same thing is going to happen in Ireland.
That's the way the Jews work. They are deceivers. They plot, they lie, they do whatever they have to do to accomplish their political agenda. This impeach Trump movement is a Jew coup.
I don't know, man. If Antifa were marching down the streets and they were waving the banner of Benito Mussolini or Francisco Franco, I'd be joining them, frankly. If Antifa was waving the banner of phalangism, if they were waving the banner of Franco, and they were saying, Catholic fascism now, I would join them. I would become a part of Antifa.
There's a particular culture that I'm not very fond of that I think has really been fucking up America lately.
Really? Is it Nazis?
Yeah. It's no. Because you can be a Nazi from any culture. That's just a political predilection.
I don't agree. I think that you've got to be a German.
Oh, I disagree, but okay.
Nazism is the weaponization of German identity.
I cannot get into the definition of Nazism with you.
The whole thing is a lie. If you were to assemble a list, a hierarchy of concerns, of problems this country faces, where would white supremacy be on the list? Right up there with Russia, probably. It's actually not a real problem in America. The combined membership of every white supremacist organization in this country would be able to fit inside a college football stadium? White supremacy, that's the problem. This is a hoax. Just like the Russia hoax. It's a conspiracy theory used to divide the country and keep a hold on power. That's exactly what's going on.
We're not anti-Catholic. We're not anti-Semitic. We believe in the white race. We believe that at this point in time that white Americans are being treated as second-class citizens, that the federal laws, the civil rights laws, have created a dual system of justice in this country, a set of federal laws that protects the interest of minorities.
And it says on a sheet that you people hand out to the young and the youths of our high schools, it says, if you want to join the Klan, quote, I swear that I am of white, non-Jewish heritage. Are you fed up with special privileges given to blacks? That's a quotation from your own literature.
Absolutely. We are
well,
a Christian...
What do you mean you're not anti-Semitic?
We are a Christian organization. We also don't allow Buddhists or Muslims or atheists in the organization.
Before we jump into the meat of this video, I just want to remind you all that this is a collaborative series I'm doing with Suris. The link to our playlist will be in the description box. Please give it a watch if you've missed the previous two videos, and consider subscribing to Suris if you haven't already done so. Also, while I was working on this video, I uploaded the first 8 minutes of it so that I could get a few trusted friends to look at it and give me their opinion. I uploaded it as unlisted, but within a few hours YouTube took it down for hate speech. It's possible this version also gets taken down, in which case I'll be given a community guideline strike and be unable to upload or stream for a week. If that happens, it will remain up on my BitChute channel, link in the description. My previous video was also age restricted, which makes it harder to spread, and of course it was demonetized. With that said, I would appreciate any Patreon support you might be able to donate. These videos take a lot of work, and YouTube demonetizes them or takes them down for hate speech. I really believe in this series, and I think it's especially pertinent given the global political climate. I think we can learn a lot from past fascists, which will make us all better equipped to recognize their talking points and be better suited to fight back against them. If you also believe that, please consider donating a few bucks a month. I can't overstate how much I appreciate it or how helpful it is with upgrading equipment, getting stock images, and all that fine stuff. Alright, so let's now talk about some Nazis, and in particular, one high-profile Nazi sympathizer, Father Charles Coughlin. Charles Coughlin was born on October 25, 1891 in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. He studied theology at St. Michael's College, was ordained as a Roman Catholic priest in 1916, and taught in Windsor for 10 years before being transferred to the Diocese of Detroit. These facts will be particularly important later on because being born a Canadian prevented Charles from running for the American presidency. He took over the 50-family parish, and almost immediately the Ku Klux Klan burned a cross in the churchyard. This prompted him to approach local radio stations and ask that he be given airtime so that he could educate the local community on Catholicism and help combat Klan prejudice. His earliest broadcasts stuck to religious themes. He wasn't yet comfortable enough airing his more controversial views, but he was a competent speaker and his following grew. Many listeners donated small sums of money to his cause, and by 1931 he'd managed to amass over $1 million. He used a good chunk of that money to construct a new church, the Shrine of the Little Flower. In 1930, his sermons began to change. It was a time of political and financial turmoil in America, and it's likely that Charles realized that now was his chance to grow his audience and pass on his views. He began sprinkling his radio sermons with political messages. First, he targeted communists. Quote, "The most dangerous communist," he said in one broadcast, "is the wolf in sheep's clothing of conservatism, who bent upon preserving the policies of greed. The wolves," he explained, included Herbert Hoover, the Morgans, every money changer in Wall Street. End quote. And money changers was a well-known euphemism for Jews, sort of like today's fascists use terms like Western civilization, instead of saying what they really mean, white people. As his audience grew, Charles began to sprinkle in more and more anti-Semitism, until it got to the point that the radio station affiliates could no longer ignore it. In 1931, CBS announced they'd be shutting down Coughlin's show, and NBC refused to host him. His mentor, Bishop Gallagher, encouraged Coughlin to find a different way to get his message out, which he did. He bought airtime, funded by his listeners, on 27 stations throughout the country, which cost him $14,000 per week, which is approximately $300,000 in today's money. At the height of his radio career, Charles Coughlin had an audience of 30 million Americans, and he would receive an average of 80,000 letters by mail per week. According to a 1938 Gallup poll, 22% of Americans reported listening to Coughlin's radio program the previous month. His radio career was turning out to be wildly successful, and he began his own magazine called Social Justice, which had a circulation of 1 million. In 1935, he also began his own political action group called the National Union for Social Justice. According to historian Alan Brinkley, quote, "Coughlin continued to dwell upon his abhorrence of communism, socialism, and kindred fallacious social and economic theories, but his broadcasts also emphasized other concerns. Coughlin's fear that the selfish practices of predatory capitalism would drive Americans to embrace these pernicious doctrines." End quote. Meanwhile, on air he continued to rail against international bankers and the international money changers in the temple, which again were weak euphemisms for Jews. Coughlin's religious message, which was helped immensely by token of him being an ordained priest, was particularly well received by Americans. He portrayed himself as a staunch man of God who was also looking out for the impoverished, the forgotten common man. According to historian David Bennett, quote, "He knew all of the tricks of the propagandist, from name-calling to glittering generality." End quote. Riding on a wave of popularity, he would make a bid for power in 1936. Unable to run for president himself, he decided to merge his political action group with that of Huey Long's Share Our Wealth Clubs, which was also led by another anti-Semitic preacher, in order to challenge Roosevelt in the upcoming election. Their candidate was soundly defeated, and Coughlin bitterly left the air for 7 weeks. His mentor, Father Gallagher, died, and his replacement wasn't fond of Coughlin's fawning over both Mussolini and Hitler. He issued a rebuke, which the Holy See backed up by saying, quote, "The Holy See regards as just and timely the correction which the Archbishop of Detroit made in reference to the remarks of Father Coughlin." End quote. While embarrassing, Coughlin's media empire was still going strong, and increasing its output of anti-Semitism. His magazine, Social Justice, published the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a forgery purported to describe a Jewish plot to take over the world. According to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, quote, "In a 1938 broadcast, Coughlin helped inspire and publicize the creation of the Christian Front, a militia-like organization that excluded Jews and promised to defend the country from communists and Jews. The Front organized bi-Christian rallies throughout the country. In New York City, police arrested several of the militiamen for harassing Jews on the street, many of them seniors, women, and children. In the context of increasingly violent language, the Christian Front made national news in 1940, when the FBI arrested 18 members in Brooklyn, New York, on suspicion of conspiring to overthrow the government. Its members continued to attract headlines during the early 1940s, for violent acts against Jews." End quote. In Coughlin's name, the Christian Front organized boycotts of Jewish businesses, encouraged the slogan "Buy Christian," and helped circulate Father Coughlin's magazine, Social Justice. Coughlin also openly associated with and promoted anti-Semitic thinkers, such as Henry Ford and Sir Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British Union of Fascists. Father Coughlin preached American isolationism and staunchly opposed America entering the war. After Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, Coughlin continued to oppose American involvement in the war. even going so far as to blame the bombing on Jews who were supposedly carrying out a nefarious plot to drag America into the war. This drew the eye of the American government, who had been casually keeping an eye on Coughlin's activities for quite a while. His passport was denied by the State Department with the stated reason, quote, reported pro-Nazi, end quote. The FBI raided Coughlin's church and accused him, rightfully so I might add, of using his magazine to reiterate, quote, the lines of enemy propaganda warfare being waged against the country from abroad, end quote. Eventually, with public sentiment turning against Coughlin due to America entering the war, and the involvement of law enforcement becoming a serious issue, the new leader of the Catholic Church in Detroit ordered Coughlin to cease all non-pastoral activities. If he refused, he'd be defrocked. Coughlin complied. He continued to serve at the Shrine of Little Flower, which some people refer to as the Shrine of the Little Fuhrer, until he died of heart failure on October 27, 1979. I believe we can learn a lot from the story of Father Coughlin. He pretty much single-handedly created the blueprint still being used by televangelists, grifters, fascists, and their sympathizers. He played on people's biases and eased them into accepting his racist, horrible ideas. People often think that fascists and other sorts of racists come right out and tell you their racist ideas in explicit terms. Father Coughlin didn't do that, and most don't. Most people who hold racist ideas will tell you that they aren't racist, like the KKK member from the beginning of this video, because they know it's not yet acceptable in mainstream society. Their goal is to make it more acceptable, and Father Coughlin understood this. He began by talking almost exclusively about religion, but once anti-Semitism began to be more popular, he began using euphemisms to dog whistle to his audience and broaden the acceptability of these ideas. From there, he became more and more upfront with his terrible ideas, and by that point, much of his audience had been eased towards the precipice. It didn't seem like that big a deal to take that one last step and embrace the void that is fascism. Father Coughlin also used plausible deniability to his advantage, by saying money changers or global bankers instead of what he meant, the Jews. He was able to deny any charges of racism he might face, and his audience could use that to excuse his behavior. He also backpedaled often by saying something terrible, and then following that with something that sounded more reasonable. That way his defenders could point to that softer, more palatable part and say he wasn't really a racist or a fascist. No. He was just misunderstood and standing up for what's right. He's just being tarred for speaking the God's honest truth. The first clip in this video is a good illustration of that tactic being used. He says blatantly racist things about Jews being a race, quote, endowed with an aggressiveness, end quote. And just a little bit later says that he doesn't know why the Night of Broken Glass happened, but maybe it was just a reprisal. And, hey, maybe we should thank God for this opportunity to, write a new precedent and establish a new tradition for which we can all unite. He reinforced the biases and racist thoughts of his audience members, but made them feel good about it, like the event that ushered in the mass killing of Jews was something positive. Something that should bring us all together in fellowship instead of the brutal, disgusting acts that they were. A theme you'll likely see throughout this series is America's ties with religion, and how most fascist movements that sprung up there used Christianity in some way. Father Coughlin, being an ordained priest, helped legitimize his views, and gave him access to a large number of potential listeners who were primed to believe him because of their shared religious faith, as well as the belief that priests are inherently good people. But that's just my thoughts. What are yours? As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you take something positive away from this video. Take care and cheers.